So next thing I'm going to be looking at is the compare contrast PowerPoint. All right. All right, so what I'm going to be going over here primarily is what you need to do for this paper and specifically the structure, okay? Structure of this paper, any of the papers that we do in this class is really important. All right, so, excuse me, a compare and contrast paper looks at the similarities and differences between two subjects. Now, if you look at just the similarities, it's a compare paper. If you look at just the differences, it's a contrast paper. Now, this is important because some people in the past may have been told that they were doing a compare-contrast paper, but only did one part or the other. And that's not what we're doing for this paper. This paper is a compare and contrast paper. You have to write about similarities and differences, and you have to spend about the same amount of time in your paper on both sides. Something else that's important is that you can only have two subjects, okay? If you have more than two subjects, then you don't have a compare-contrast paper anymore. You have something called a classification and division paper. If you turn in a classification and division paper for a compare-contrast paper, that's the wrong structure, and you don't do well as far as your grade. Okay. Katya says, I did this in my previous class, English 0092 compare and contrast assignment. Okay, all right, cool. Cool that you have some experience with that. All right, so you must look at both similarities and differences, and you must only have two subjects. So, how do you choose two subjects? Okay, now this sounds like it would be like the easiest part of the assignment, but for some people, it's the hardest. Like they'll choose two things that have a lot of great differences, but like very little similarities, or they'll choose the two things that are really, really close together with their similarities and have no differences, okay? This will drive you crazy, okay? Excuse me, because you won't be able to make it work, okay? So if you choose two things, and maybe you're working through like listing pre-writing or however you want to do your pre-writing, and you're coming up with a whole bunch of stuff on one side and barely anything on another side, don't make your life stressful, okay? Just say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and pick something else, okay? And just do that, you know, just shake hands with it. You know, it was maybe a good idea when you started out, but you know, as you progress with it, it's just not working anymore. So choose two things where you can have a lot of great similarities and differences. If you get too much on one side or the other, just scrap it and start something else, okay? So for an example, and this is why you can't use this for your paper because I'm doing it right here. An example of this would be doing 2-year colleges and 4-year universities. Okay, so let's say I was writing a paper on 2-year colleges and 4-year universities. So now we need to see, well, what do we know? What do we know about the similarities and differences between those two things? Now, me personally, I like to do listing. Okay, that's just something that works for me. So doing something like this, I would sit down and see about, well, how many similarities can I list and how many differences can I list? Okay. So for the purposes of this example, I did 5 similarities and 5 differences. The best papers come from when you have a lot to choose from on both sides, because then you can be selective. Then you can choose the best things from both sides. But if you're writing stuff and you're like, I can only come up with 3 similarities and 3 differences, that may not be the greatest topic to choose, okay? You should be able to come up with a lot of content on both sides. So now we've got our topics, we've got our points. Now we have to choose how are we going to structure this paper, okay? So we have 2 structures that we can choose from. And you probably have heard these before. You know, this isn't something magical that I'm coming up with today or anything. These are the 2 ways that you structure compare contrast papers. You either do it with point by point or subject by subject. You may have heard subject by subject referred to as block by block in other classes. But these are the 2 that we're working with. If you're choosing point by point, that means that each individual paragraph is controlled by the individual point that you're talking about and how your two subjects relate to that point. If you're doing a subject-by-subject paper, each individual paragraph is going to focus on one subject at a time and look at how either the similarities or the differences relate to that one subject. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. Some people like to do point by point. Some people like to do subject by subject. Whichever one you like, whichever one works best for you is what you should use, okay? As long as you can do it consistently and correctly, it doesn't matter to me which one you choose, okay? Just do the one that fits you best. Now, the guidelines for this paper, minimum 3 pages. For the honors class, minimum 4 pages. So generally speaking, people tend to do between 3 and 5 on either side. Because if you only have 2, generally that's not compelling enough to have a compare and contrast of something. And if you're going 6 or 7 or 8, your individual body paragraphs are probably way too short. Okay, so generally a good number is 3 to 5. So if you're like looking at your pre-writing content, if you're able to come up with like, say, 7 similarities and 8 differences, and you're like, okay, can I choose like 4 things from either side that are going to be interesting and compelling, then you're going to be really, really safe. Okay. For this example, I'm doing 3 and 3. Excuse me. All right, so both papers, regardless of whether you choose point by point or subject by subject, are going to start the same way. You're going to have an introduction paragraph. That's not going to change for basically anything that we do in this class. Okay, every paper, and then when you go on to your history papers and your psychology papers and your macroeconomics papers and all those things, all papers have an introduction, and we'll talk more about why that is on the Wednesday-Thursday lecture. And then it's all about, well, how are we going to structure these papers? If I'm doing point by point and I'm doing 3 points of similarity and 3 points of difference, each paragraph is going to be a point. My big choice here is, do I start with the differences first or do I start with the similarities first? And another thing too is sometimes what people will do is they'll try to oscillate. They'll try to do 0.1 difference, 0.1 similarity, 0.2 difference, 0.2 similarity, 0.3 difference, 0.3 similarity. You don't want to do that. One of the goals that any kind of writing has is that you want to be clear and easy to understand for your audience. And going back and forth like that can be jarring to some people. So grouping your differences together and grouping your similarities together, that's going to be easier and more logically structured for your audience to follow. And again, it's all going to depend on what you've chosen to work with and what you think your audience's needs are. Excuse me. So if you think it's better to start with your similarities and then move to your differences, great. If you think you'd rather start with the differences and then move to the similarities, fine. These are choices that you're going to be making in relation to your audience and the materials that you're working with. If I do subject by subject, what you'll see is that I have fewer paragraphs, but these paragraphs will tend to be longer. Okay, so like for this one, I decided, okay, I'm going to talk about similarities first and then differences. So I do subject 1 similarities, so that first body paragraph is going to be all the similarities as they relate to subject 1. Second paragraph, all the similarities as they relate to subject 2, and then I transition to talking about my differences. Subject 1, all the differences in relation to subject 1, and then all the differences in relation to subject 2. And then, again, regardless of whether I'm doing point by point or subject by subject, I'm going to end the papers with a conclusion. You have to have conclusions. Again, any kind of paper you're writing, not just for English class, any class, you're going to have a conclusion. And I'll talk more on the Wednesday-Thursday lecture about why that is. All right, so there was a question. Do you have any ideas or suggestions on the best way to come up with 2 topics? Is there a list to help us give us ideas? Because your topics need to come from your own observations and experiences, then it's something that's going to be personalized to everyone. Like I said previously, think about the experiences that you've had in the past. You know, have you been involved in any sports? Have you been involved in any school teams? Do you have any hobbies? Um, do you have any work experience? All these things can be what you can possibly use to come up with topics. But because everybody's topics are going to be different, because everybody's led different lives, it's going to be different for each person. Okay. All right. So pardon me. All right. So I just kind of went over everything that you see in this slide, whether you're controlling ideas or your points, or whether you're controlling ideas for paragraphs or your structure, or I'm sorry, are your subjects. Okay. And however you want to structure that within those different organizational guidelines, that's up to you. Again, if you think differences will be more interesting to your audience to present first, go ahead. If you think similarities are a better place to start, that's cool too. Okay. But again, everybody's going to be writing something different, so you're going to see a lot of different choices when we get to the peer responses. And again, some people will choose point by point, and some people will choose subject by subject. And again, there's no, excuse me, there's no right or wrong to this. It's whatever you're more comfortable with. Okay, so if I was doing this, and I was doing point by point, I would have my introduction. I would say something along the lines of, when people get to their junior and senior years of high school, one of the big decisions that they make is where they're going to continue their post-secondary education. While some students prefer to go to a big university because they know they're going to be there for 4 years, or because they have a particular professor they want to work with in their major program, some students will then also want to choose the affordability and ease of use that are provided by colleges. Knowing the similarities and differences between colleges and universities will help students make a more informed decision about where they think they should go. So that's an introduction. It's giving some context and background to the topic. It's providing a thesis statement, and it's letting my audience know this is what I'm talking about in this paper. So my first paragraph, body paragraph, colleges offer a limited number of degrees and certifications, while universities offer a larger variety of degrees of certifications, and I would have a whole paragraph that discusses that. Next paragraph, colleges are less expensive to attend than universities, and I would have a whole paragraph that discusses that. College has more diverse age group as a student body, ranging from 18 through people in their 70s, while universities have a mostly traditional student age group of 18 to 26, and I would have a whole paragraph on that. And then I would transition into my similarities. Both have general education courses and provide certification programs for certain types of occupations, and I'd have a whole paragraph on that. Both provide valuable services to students like financial aid programs, tutoring centers, libraries, and career centers. Whole paragraph explaining that. Both are moving towards providing both in-class and distance learning platforms for learning, and I would have a whole paragraph on that. And then I would have my conclusion, which restates my thesis and closes my discussion. So as you can see, in each one of those paragraphs, the controlling idea in those paragraphs is the point and how my two subjects relate to that point. Okay. If I'm doing subject by subject, I'm using the exact same materials. I'm just structuring the information in a different way. So my subject by subject would start with an introduction. First body paragraph is going to only talk about colleges. Colleges have GEC courses and certification programs, provide valuable services to students, and provide both classroom and distant learning environments. And then I would go into more explanation about how colleges do this. Next paragraph. Like colleges, universities, blah, blah, blah courses, blah, blah, blah programs, blah, blah, blah services, blah, blah, blah different types of learning environments. And then I would explain how universities do this. Then I would translate or transfer to my differences. Colleges have blah, blah, limited number of degree types, blah, blah, blah age group, and blah, blah, blah expense. And then explain that. Then universities have blah, blah, blah degrees, blah, blah, blah student body, blah, blah, blah cost, explain that. And then I'd have my conclusion. So again, Both types of papers are expressing the exact same materials. They're just organizing the materials in a slightly different way. Now, as far as this is concerned, you have to be consistent. You cannot start your paper in one type of structure and then switch when you get halfway through. And unfortunately, a lot of students do this, and it really hurts their grade, because a major part of your assessment on this is being able to follow a structure correctly. Okay, so they may start in point by point. Let's say they're doing their differences in point by point, and then for some reason they get halfway through their paper, they get to similarities, and then they switch subject by subject. You can't do that. If you start in point by point, you got to stay there. If you start in subject by subject, you got to stay there. You can't just switch in the middle or any place in your paper. Okay? Pardon me. All right. I just basically said this, so I'm going to keep going. Now, transitions. Some people, okay, some people are really big on using transitional words and phrases, and that's fine. That is more a stylistic choice on your part, okay? You need to use things like first, second, third, fourth, first, next, then, last. Okay, that's fine. That's you. And there's nothing wrong with that. Some people don't use them. That's fine too. Okay? Again, it's more of a stylistic choice as to whether you use them or not. If you use them, you should be consistent. You shouldn't like start using them and just like abruptly stop for no reason. The kinds of transitional words and phrases that are normally used for compare contrast papers for the compare part, also in the same manner, similarly, likewise, for contrasting, but, however, on the other hand, in contrast, nevertheless, still, even though, on the contrary, yet, although, and whereas. So, if you want to use them, cool. If you don't want to use them, that's fine too. Okay. So, to summarize, okay, you got to first pick two subjects that are going to have compelling similarities and differences, because again, you have to spend about half your paper on one and half your paper on the other. Okay. Can't have just like a really little itty bitty summary or similarity part and then like this huge difference part. And that sometimes happens, so you got to be careful, okay? Sometimes I'll have people do like a page of similarities and 2 pages of difference. That's not going to work. It has to be equal. So you get your 2 subjects that are going to give you a nice balanced discussion. Choose whether you want to use point by point or subject by subject. Draft your paper, making sure that you're consistent with the structure that you've chosen. And if you want, you can use transitional words and phrases to help move your audience through your different points and discussion. And that's what we're doing for paper 1. So, does anyone have questions at this point about anything related to paper 1? Okay, good. Now, if you do end up having questions, okay, and that's perfectly fine. I want you to ask questions. What I don't ever want to have happen is you're like not sure about something, you don't ask a question, you turn something in your paper, and it draws your grade down because you did it wrong. Okay? My goal is the same as yours. I want everybody to get the best possible grade that they can on their assignments. Okay? And if you're not sure on something, please ask. Okay? I really do hope people will ask. You can email me, you can post to the question thread, you can come to my office hours. So far, no one has come to my office hour yet, which is 8 to 9, Monday through Thursday, in the same room that we have class. You can come, you can make a tutoring appointment and see me during my tutoring time. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get those questions to me. Okay, so please, if you do have questions, let me know. All right, so that is it for class today. If you do not have any questions, I will see you in the Wednesday, Thursday lecture. Please make sure that you complete your reading that's assigned in your textbook for that. You can find the page numbers in your course schedule. If you do have questions, you can either go ahead and type them into the chat area, or you can unmute and ask your questions. Other than wise, I will see you Wednesday or Thursday, whichever one you attend. Okay, Constance, go ahead.
Okay, so when you said we could do point by point, do you mean like, let's say I choose my two topics and I could speak about like the similarities and the differences in like one paragraph?
No, each point needs its own paragraph.
Okay. Okay, for example, if I were to say like, let's say I chose like night and day, and if I were to say if one of my, things that I was comparing and, stating the differences were that they both have like light, I guess, like they both provide some type of light. Can I say that, yeah, they both provide light, but the one in the day is like brighter?
No, because one of
Okay.
the assignment stipulations, and I'll bring this up here, is that you cannot use the same points as a similarity and a difference. It has to be either
Okay.
a difference or a similarity. It cannot function as both.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have a hard time wording my questions.
That's okay.
Okay. So if I were to have the two topics, you know what, I would just look at the modules and stuff and see if it helps me. And if I still have questions, I'll go into the like email you or
Okay.
join. Yeah.
Sure, that's fine. I mean, really, the first thing that you'll want to do once you've chosen these two subjects that you want to work with is figure out what you want your points to be.
Okay.
And if there's, if you, like I said, if you're having problems with like one side, like, wow, I got all these great differences, but my similarities are like really, really weak.
Mhm.
That's a really good indicator that that's not going to be a good topics to work with.
Okay.
But just and don't be surprised if you have to go through several sets of topics before you find one that's going to work.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Have a blessed day.
Yeah, you too. Okay, Jeanette, go ahead.
Okay, um, would this because this is just an example, but would this be considered as two topics, like living before the virus and how we're living now? Like, could that be two?
How we're better now?
No, how we're living now.
Oh,
And
how we're
before.
living now. Well, I would put it to you this way. The whole goal of this assignment is to tell your audience something that they have little to no knowledge of. This is the goal. The purpose of this essay is to inform an audience that has little to no knowledge of the topics chosen. Do you think that there's anyone in this class that does not know about how life was before and after the virus?
Yeah, they do.
Right. So would that be a good topic?
No.
No, it would not.
Okay.
No. Okay. Okay, Thomas, go ahead.
Hello?
Hello, Thomas.
Oh, hi. All right, so I have two questions.
Okay.
So I seen that when you was going through, you crossed out second person. So are we not using second person at all in our
Right.
papers?
Not for any of the papers in this class, the four main papers. For the individual class assignments, it's okay if you use it, but for the four main papers, no second person.
Okay. And my second question is, so since this paper is from like strictly our experience, how do we sound like credible enough to our writing to get people to believe us? Or
Well, thing with credibility at the level that you're writing at, we're not walking into your paper thinking that you're going to lie to us. Okay, we're walking in with a certain level of trust. Now, if you start doing things like saying things that we know aren't real or true, and I've had students do that before. Like I've had students say things in their papers, and I'm like, "Wait, that's not true. Where'd you get that from?" And they literally said, "I made it up." People can sense when things aren't accurate. So if there would be a point in your paper where you start to BS somebody, it's pretty easy for them to say, you know what, I don't quite understand why you're including this information. So yeah, the people will be walking into your paper thinking that you're not lying to them. And until you give them a reason why, and you certainly don't want to give them a reason why, you don't want to lie to people, you can assume that there is a certain level of trust. You just don't want to violate that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, Jonathan,